Welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast. Episode 117 is an interview with Andrew Wynd. Andrew is an Australian expert physiotherapist with a special focus on foot and ankle issues. With over 20 years of clinical experience, he typically deals with complex cases from both elite athletes and everyday runners. Having represented Australia in 2 times World Championships in cross-country skiing, Andrew has mixed it up with some of the fittest athletes in the world and has even won the Rialto Stair climb event in Melbourne. Andrew joins me today to talk about how important your feet are to your athletic career and on how focusing on your feet can fast-track your progress. If you do enjoy this episode, which I hope you do, please go on over to Apple Podcasts to rate, review and subscribe, or subscribe here on YouTube. It really helps grow the audience and the show. I do appreciate your feedback and support. Are injuries or niggles ruining your enjoyment of running and hindering your performance? Get on top of these by seeing the specialists at Health and High Performance. Utilising the latest in technology and with an absolute wealth of experience, the team at Health and High Performance can assist you with all your running injury and performance needs. So, to get back to enjoying your running and achieving the results you are capable of, head to healthhp.com.au/run, or you can find them on Instagram, Health High Performance. Health and High Performance are located in Mont Albert, Melbourne, but they are also available for telehealth appointments not only Australia-wide, but around the world. Contact them on their website to find out more. Wild Earth Australia are the online store to help you make the most of the outdoors with top quality gear at great prices. Peak Endurance podcast listeners can use the discount code Peak Endurance, surprisingly, all caps, to get 10% off at checkout. Head on over to wildearth.com.au to get everything you need for your next adventure. If you want to be the best athlete you can be, you deserve the best coaching you can get. Peak Endurance Coaching will help you achieve your running goals. And I can do this by providing you with customized plans that reflect your commitments in life and your athletic history. You will become fitter, faster and stronger whilst becoming part of the Peak Endurance Coaching community. Don't waste a minute of your running journey. Email me, Isabel, at peakendurancecoaching.com.au to get a program designed just for you started. I really hope you enjoy this chat with Andrew and find it informative and helpful. Hi, Andrew, and welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast.
Hey, Isabel, thanks for having me on. It's an honour to be talking to you today.
Yeah, no, and great to have you because we always want to hear from specialists in the field. So before we get into that, can you tell the listeners a bit about yourself and your athletic background?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a physio by trade, but I started skiing, I guess, was what became my sport when I was 15, and then it became sort of a little more serious when I was 19. So I was in physio school by then, and I was out for a run and trying to work off some of the calories that uni students tend to consume, and I bumped into an old skier, and he had made the Victorian junior squad and was heading to Poland to race at Junior World Championships in cross-country skiing. And I remember back at school, I'd beaten this guy fairly convincingly, and I thought, that sounds like fun. So I ended up getting back into a bit of training, and 2 years later was invited to the national team. And a year or two after that was claimed a spot on the Australian ski team, and then that took me racing around the world for 10 years, and I did a little running in between, not that fast and not necessarily that long, but that was mostly, it became all about cross-country skiing with a little bit of running and cycling and triathlons and things as cross training in there.
And cross-country skiing and running are fairly similar in the sort of the fitness you need. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, 100%. I think in cross country skiing, there's two techniques. There's classical technique, which is where you're sort of shuffling or walking or exaggerated striding. And then there's skating, which is more like ice skating. So I'd say particularly the classical technique, the best classic skiers in the world are very good runners. Particularly the Norwegians they hold some, a couple of them hold some track records, I think, from some time ago. So they can certainly pull out pretty good runs as well. So there's huge crossover both in the movement pattern, but certainly for fitness.
I certainly know a lot of the Europeans in the winter season do cross-country skiing to keep their fitness up. Now, you also won the Rialto Tower climb.
Yeah, I did. That was a while ago. That was in 2004, and the story behind that was we were doing a lot of training at the time. When I say we, some of the national team guys were living in Melbourne here in Australia, and we were running up Mount Dandenong. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
And we were doing intervals up and down Mount Dandenong, and so we were in reasonable shape. And then my girlfriend at the time, now wife, worked in the Rialto building, and she said, "Oh, there's this race that they're running again, you know." And I said, "I reckon I'd be pretty good at that." And she said, "Well, what? It's on tomorrow. Why don't you enter?"
Oh, wow.
And so I said, I will." And so I rocked up on a Friday lunchtime and ended up winning the damn thing. So it was a bit of a shock to me as well.
Yeah, well, that's amazing, having entered it the day before. So that gives hope to a lot of the athletes out there who do run up and down Mount Dandenong a lot. I've often wondered, what's it like, being inside that stairwell when you're huffing and puffing, and like, is it constrictive? What's it like?
Yeah, it's some of the most painful minutes I've ever experienced, certainly respiratory wise. It's horrible. The airwell there is, they do it on Eureka now, the high building, and I've done that as well. But the airwell is locked most of the time, so it's really stale air, and it's pretty claustrophobic, and it's hard to pass. And I know there's, the stair running community is a whole other thing. And I've treated a few of the stair runners, and they take it, very seriously. But yeah, it's horrible. I was coughing for days afterwards,
Oh, wow.
maybe 3 or 4 days. It was horrible on the lungs.
I bet. Now, also as a physiotherapist, you work with athletes, elite athletes, and just everyday people on foot and ankle issues. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I knew I wanted to be a sports physio. That's like most physios. And on the national team, I had an assessment by the then national team physio, and I think he was secretly recruiting, to be honest, because he said to me, all good physios need to know the foot and ankle really well, because that's the connection to the ground. If you want to work with athletes, you need to be good at that area. And I sort of thought about that, and I thought that makes sense. So the next thing I knew, he'd offered me a job and said, come and work for me. And his name's Stuart, and he worked with a lot of foot and ankle surgeons. And so the next thing I knew, I was doing foot and ankle specialty rehab. And I guess it was something that I realized pretty soon that wasn't necessarily being done well by a lot of other physios, because you just don't spend enough time on that area in our course. And I ended up realizing that I could get better results than some of my other peers. And so I ended up sort of specializing in that. So it's probably 70% of my day is foot and ankle. It tends to be complex ones now. Some of it's post-operative surgical things. I consult to everyday weekend warriors mostly, but I also get a few professionals that have had some chronic issues. I've had a couple of Australian Open players in the last sort of 6 months. So quite a few of Tennis Australia tend to drift in through here with difficult problems. Elite endurance athletes, a whole host of different types of people.
So why are our feet so important for performance? I mean, I know we run on them, but we kind of forget about them by the same token. So why are they so important?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, we unless you're running bare feet or you've got a real interest in it, and I'm sure your listeners, some of them have thought about it a lot, some of them won't have thought about it a lot, but they're stuck in shoes. We don't even look at them most of the time, and some people really hate, looking at their feet and don't want to look at them, and runners with their banged up toes and the like. Sometimes really don't want to look at them, but why are they so important? Look, it's obviously it's that connection to the ground. When you look at the talus bone, for example, and I could talk all day about the importance of your feet, but the talus bone, the bottom of our ankle, it's only say about 4 centimeters wide, and our entire body is sitting on top of that. That in itself is extraordinary. But there's some new research in particular that is looking at and the contribution of the foot itself to propulsion. And some of this is being done in Australia, which is exciting. And what they're finding is between 17 and 20% of forward propulsion is contributed to from the foot. And specifically, the role of the foot muscles is really been poorly researched and understood until fairly recently. So I think for a runner in particular, or any really endurance athlete that is weight bearing, we'll remove swimmers, etc., out of that. Any weight bearing athlete, their feet not only contribute to performance, but may play a really key role in preventing injuries. And we certainly are always looking for ways to avoid any single days lost running. So they play a key role.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing what you said about the talus bone and 4 centimeters in our whole body. Like, I'd never really thought about it like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I can show you on camera, but this is our talus bone here, and the whole body weight just sitting on that is just extraordinary. So if there's any sort of interruption to that, then the compensatory effects is quite dramatic. You'll compensate for that somewhere, somehow, and then tissues get overloaded.
Yep. That makes sense. And people, if you wanted to see that, you can look on the YouTube clip for that. So, and what mistakes do runners generally make in regards to their feet?
Yeah, so shoe choice is critical, I think, there. And that's a question I get asked on if not daily, certainly weekly basis. And that's always topical. And the way I sort of answer that is to refer to some of Benno Nig, N-I-G-G. He's a researcher out of Canada that's spent a lot of time on this. And it's probably one of the more reliable methods of choosing shoes. And largely it centers around the really simplistic way of going and trying on a bucket load of shoes and picking the pair that just feels right for you. I used to work at the Athlete's Foot, and we had some what seems like trivial training now, but at the time it seemed really revolutionary, and using force plates and things like that. But it was amazing how when I tried to apply science and training to shoe selection, that invariably, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, the customer would choose the right shoe for them anyway, going off feel. And that's certainly supported by Nig's research. So that's how I answer that question. But I think running in a shoe that it doesn't fit well, is too tight, is a major mistake. And really just not looking after your feet. So they get stiff, and not keeping them supple and mobile, I think, is probably another key simple to fix mistake that a lot of runners make as well.
So I'll just go back a little bit. You're talking about shoes being too tight. Is that to do with us lacing too tight or buying the wrong size?
Yeah, the bigger problem is the shoe's too small. So it might feel nice and snug and nice and connected, but what it does is then it reduces our toes' ability to utilize all the small muscles, and then that has a huge flow-on effect. So generally, too small is a major problem. Lacing too tight will cause a short-term issue on the top of your foot. And you might have experienced that, or some of your listeners might have. But I'm not as fussed about that. That usually goes away. But too small is a problem.
Yeah. Okay. What about too big? Does that have other issues?
Yeah, great question. Particularly for off-road and trail runners, if you're sliding around, and that's certainly an issue. So, but for me, if I had to choose between the lesser of two evils, I'd prefer a too large a shoe than a too small a shoe every day of the week.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, when I'm running an ultra, I have a couple of sizes as my feet swell.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, the sock you're wearing is key as well, and preventing shear force as well. So make sure you've tested your shoe sock combination, and then make sure you take that sock in with you when you're trying on all of the multiple shoes if you're going to use that strategy.
Yep, that's fair enough. Now, what about in regards to toe box? Would you recommend, I know you said to get what's comfortable, but would you recommend a wider toe box?
Yes, I'm glad you said that. Yes, wider toe box, the better. And we said we wouldn't dive too far down the rabbit hole of barefoot shoes.
That's okay.
But if we're going to talk about it a little bit, then a barefoot style shoe is fantastic because it gives the toes enough room to spread. So a wide toe box is definitely my preference. I like natural shoes. I like barefoot shoes as long as you do all the strengthening and you're committed to making them work for you. So most of my clients, I'd say, are not, but we have that conversation.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about a barefoot shoe, are you talking about like Vibrams or more like Ultras with the zero drop?
Yeah, so barefoot versus minimalist. Yeah, that's an important distinction. So I guess I'm talking a minimalist shoe generically. So yes, there's a difference between the barefoot with the Vibrams, which is harder to find now. But the Vivos and the Zeros that are natural or minimalist, the most minimalist type shoes. Yeah.
Now, what are some of the things that we can do as runners to ensure our feet are in good condition?
All right. So this is my favorite thing to talk about. First of all, you've got to make sure your feet are mobile. So we mentioned that earlier, and that's really easy. My favorite little tool there is a silicone massage ball, but you can use a tennis ball and rolling the foot, and that would be something that I'd recommend to every athlete on if not daily, certainly weekly basis. Not only does that massage the muscles underneath the feet, but it's been shown to improve blood flow, improves balance, believe it or not, short term as well, which is kind of cool. And probably most importantly, it mobilizes the joints in your feet. And we've got so many of these little joints that we really need all of them to be working in harmony together. And if they get locked up, then the force gets transmitted from that area to the next area, either upstream or downstream. So that's tip number one, would be mobilizing the foot.
Would we do that sitting or standing?
Yeah, start off sitting for sure, and then gradually build up to standing. So sitting allows you to relax, and you don't have to go really hard to get an effective mobilization through there. And in fact, sometimes clenching is almost counterproductive. So we want to just relax the foot. I talk about making the foot mold to the ball is the sort of words I tend to use, and start off sitting and then build up to standing.
Yep. So some other things. Yep.
Yeah. So the next most important thing, once you've made sure your foot's unlocked, is you got to strengthen these little muscles in the feet. There's heaps of different ways to do that. I could tell you about all the different research on what's better, but you just need a couple of really good ones. And probably my favorite would be the short foot. And that's probably got the most amount of research around it. And so what you're trying to do here is you're really trying to dome the arch or shorten the arch. So this is typically done in sitting so that you don't have to have a lot of weight on it. And you're trying to make the arch lift up and shorten. So make your foot literally shorter. Take your toes back towards your heel. And you can have a go at doing that in your shoes even, but ideally because you want to watch your toes. And if your toes are clawing or buckling whilst doing that, then you're trying too hard and you're using the wrong muscles, using the long flexor muscles. And we want to use just the muscles in the arch. So the short foot or intrinsic muscles of the arch.
I'm trying to do that now while we're talking.
How are you going with it?
Not well. I think my toes are clawing.
Okay, so no clawing. We definitely do not want clawing. That suggests that then that's the common pattern we see, is that the long toe flexors, which very important propulsive muscles, they get overworked, and maybe this might even contribute to shin splints and tibial stress syndrome as well. So we want to switch them off. They're already doing lots, and we want to get the little muscles that are just in the arch working. Commonly, what you're experiencing right now, Isabel, is that you can't do that well despite practicing. So if that's the case, then grab a TheraBand, and hopefully you all know what that is. That just the resistance band. You want to choose a light resistance one, fold it in half so it's narrow, and wrap it around. Let's start with your big toes, probably the easiest, and then push down into that with a straight toe. So I call that toe waving or toe gym, and it seems easy, but it's actually quite challenging again to avoid clawing. And if you're really committed, you could do that on every single toe.
Yeah, it sounds easy, but I can bet it wouldn't be. Yep.
Yeah, and it takes a bit of mucking around, and look, that's a bit of a problem with these exercises. They're time consuming, and really getting athletes, if they're certainly not in pain, then it's hard to motivate them to do them. So that is certainly a little bit of a challenge.
I suppose it's something you could do while watching television, but yes, I know sometimes once I'm on the couch, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's one of the reasons why we developed out of the clinic here something called Flamingo feet, which are silicone toe spreaders that you can just slip on. And we haven't published the research yet. We're still collating data, but we think that these silicone toe spreaders, by wearing them around, you're actually strengthening your muscles. That's what we've seen over the last 2 years, and we're measuring that the small muscles in the feet on ultrasound. And because it solves that exact problem. You're on the couch and you're done. Whereas if you just slip these little silicone toe spreaders on, then you can walk around a little bit when you get up and grab a coffee or a tea or whatever. And we think you're working your muscles at the same time.
Sounds good. So what else can we do?
What else can we do? So there's probably a few other exercises that I would suggest doing. And this is a really easy one. It's a little bit of a progression. You can have a go at this now if you want to. So calf raises is something we're all familiar with. We know how important the calf is. A little tip there is leaning forwards. So doing your calf raise, instead of standing vertically, lean right forward. So your body is still straight, but what will happen there is your toes will flex. Your toes will flex forwards. So we know from the research that if we strengthen the arch muscles in a toe flexed up position, which is exactly like what happens in our propulsive phase of running, then that's 4 times as effective for strengthening the arch muscles. So slight little tweak to what you're perhaps already doing in doing calf raises, but just lean forward so that the angle is a propulsive position. That's another easy tip.
Yep. From a standing position, I'm presuming you mean.
Yes, standing position for that one.
Yep. Now, what are your thoughts on orthotics or shoe inserts and that sort of thing, which many runners do?
Yeah. Look, that's like everything. It's a case by case individual analysis. I think that's a huge problem in healthcare and in our industry is coming up with sort of blanket claims. We really need to assess that on a case by case basis. My Personal preference is I'm not a huge fan of them. If we can avoid them wherever possible, I do. That's how I practice, and that's certainly the ethos of our team here. And the podiatrist we have on our team here is the same. But I think it's important to understand what's the problem we're trying to solve, and what are the options, and what's each option going to involve from a time commitment and effort point of view. And if people are not going to, let's say they've got a major foot problem and they've consistently injured and their mechanics are not ideal, then if they're time poor, if they're like me, they got 2 kids and running businesses and sneaking runs in here and there, they're going to struggle to do the commitment, I think, to what it's going to take to strengthen everything and slowly build up. But it can be done. So it's a case by case. So I'm not anti them. I'm not for them. It's case by case. Personally, I use them for road running. If I'm trail running, I can get away with not using them because of the variable terrain. I think my other comment on that would be the number of times that clients come in and whether they're athletes or non-athletes, and they've got orthoses in their shoes, and then I ask them, what are they for? And they can't remember. Is a classic weekly response. And so, they were there for a reason at the time. It was probably a really good reason. That whatever issue was is probably resolved, and they're still wearing these things. So I'm not a big fan of that. So if you are wearing them, make sure they're still doing what they're designed to do, and maybe get them checked. And do you still need them? Would be the question I'd ask myself.
I've heard, and it could be an old wives' tale, but can sort of orthotics make your feet lazy?
Yeah, that's not an old wives' tale. So it's yes is the short answer. They can. Again, it's massively variable. So if you look at the orthotic research, they'll grab a whole lot of samples of people. They'll put orthotics in, and unsurprisingly, when you break it down to the biomechanical level, some people pronate more with orthotics in, and some people pronate less with orthotics in. So it really depends on the shape of their foot and the axis of where the movement's occurring, and then where that force is then being redirected from the orthotic. So yeah, that's why we get such hugely variable responses from orthotics. So yes, you're right. In some people, orthotics can turn some foot muscles off.
Yeah. Now, when we're just walking around the house or, doing that sort of thing, should we try to be barefoot, as much as possible?
In my opinion, yes. Absolutely. If you can tolerate it, yes. And if the surface if you got polished concrete, which is, was pretty trendy in the last 10 years, I'm not sure that's an amazing surface to be constantly walking bare feet on, but polished wood floors, as much as possible. I'm a big fan of getting out of the shoes.
Yeah. Now, when you were just talking about the concrete there, is there a difference, when we're running, and you did talk about trails with a variable surface, between, say, running on bitumen, concrete and trails?
Yes, massively. Concrete's so much more dense. And I couldn't quote a research paper on that, but having spoken to treated plenty of runners over the years, including and felt what it's like to run on concrete versus asphalt versus trail. There's a massive difference. So the variability is hugely helpful for trail running. So it just means forces are shared across different parts of the body, and they don't tend to get channeled into one spot, which tends to overload that spot, and the body can't cope necessarily with that. So yeah, no, there's a big difference, and stay away from the concrete.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of the bike paths, they're getting rid of the bitumen and putting concrete down, which I find really frustrating.
It's getting harder, isn't it? Being city dwellers to get out on the and the sand trails as well. Like they're even getting rarer and rarer. So Yeah, no, natural surfaces definitely the way to go if you can find them.
Yeah. And now, what about, like doing drills? If we're the kind of athlete that does do drills, would we be better off doing them in bare feet, like on a nice grassy surface, or would we be better off doing them in the kind of shoes that we would run in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked because I haven't talked technique yet, and that's probably the other big area where you can make some big gains from performance and both injury prevention as well. So going back earlier to your question about what can we do to look after our feet, technique training and technique drills and technique coaching is the other big part of that. So I'm a huge fan of investing time in that. And specifically your point, yeah, that's usually how I introduce runners if they're curious as to what the start of their barefoot or minimalist shoe journey is, to take the shoes off for drills and find an oval. There's plenty of those around, and do their drills at least bare feet. See how that feels, see how it changes their form. And invariably, the overwhelming response is usually it improves their kinesthetic awareness, so their feedback through their feet, which tends to get better posture through the runner and more propulsion. So big fan of drills and done bare feet safely. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and of course, just checking the surface. Now, what about, say, if we're an athlete who does plyometrics? What's the effect on the feet with that one?
Yeah, well, huge forces. So huge forces through the whole body. So proceed with caution is my usual approach there. That's certainly where the research is headed around the role of these muscles in the feet. So we've talked about the intrinsic muscles. We think that their role is perhaps more to keep the big toe connected down into the ground, and then make the foot itself more of a spring. And so, because there's been lots of examples in research of, and I've seen this myself, is people picking up marbles and activating the muscles in their arch. And that's great. That's certainly what we've done forever until the last sort of 10 years. But they don't necessarily get stronger. They get better activation, but they don't get stronger, and their propulsion doesn't change. So that's really important, I think, for the athlete, because they're interested generally more in performance. And so to strengthen the muscles in their feet, they have to do slightly different exercises. Some of the ones that I talked about earlier, that calf raise one, for example, leaning forwards, that's hugely beneficial for getting actual improvements in propulsion. And we've seen, again, with that toe, just to reiterate that point, if we strengthen the arch muscles with the toes flexed up, and we get that much better result. The follow-up of that study was that the athletes measured 6 weeks later, and that's not a huge amount of time, they had increased in, their distance in horizontal and vertical leap. So that's what we want to get to. So where was I going with that? Geez, I got excited there about some more foot research. Plyometrics, that's right. So I think once or twice a week is okay. I know I gave myself a stress fracture from doing my foot from doing them 3 times a week. So watch out for that. I've seen that time and time again. A little trap to fall into, but I mean, there is huge forces there. So just a little bit would be my professional advice there.
Yeah. Now, how does our ankle mobility impact on our feet?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's probably the first place I look at. We'll be checking the talus and the ankle joint. So we call that the talocrural joint. That's the first thing I look at in any foot and ankle problem. So whilst we've talked a lot about toes today and muscles in the feet, that I still believe that the function of the ankle is probably the most important part. So it's the number one aspect of what I think we can do as therapists, because there's no direct muscle attachment to the navicular. So that's really interesting because we, as physios, we use muscles to sort of influence an area of either injury or an area we want to change alignment, but there's nothing that attaches to the talus directly. So we can't just fire up a muscle that will influence that talus function. So the positioning of that talus is really important. So there's definitely, in my opinion, a role for calf stretches is probably the key one that you can do on your own. But manual therapy, the role of a chiropractor, physio is helpful in that particular situation. So ankle dorsiflexion, so that forwards bending movement is you really need I'm going to say an adequate amount that is individually variable. But you need an adequate amount to do what you want to do. So you don't need a huge amount to run, and you need even less to sprint. But you do need, certainly for distance running, you do need some adequate range there.
Yeah, I can imagine. So do you have any final tips for runners for looking after their feet or getting the most out of their feet so they can get the most out of their running?
Yeah, so we've covered off on those exercises that if you try them out for 6 weeks, watch the difference. You'll notice a difference. Yeah. So definitely strengthen your arch muscles. And
how often should they do those exercises? Sorry.
Yeah, great point. So once a day would be ideal, and you don't need to do them for long. So 3 sets of 15 slow raises, 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down. I'd be happy with that. That'll get you what you need to get to.
Okay. Yep. Sorry. Go on.
No, not at all. Since you mentioned it, with ankle sprains, number of times a little ankle tweak. There's certainly plenty of research, and my personal experience is that runners typically don't take little ankle sprains seriously enough, and all sorts of things happen in the muscular system on a very subtle level. And yes, you can suck it up and keep running and maybe you ice it for a day and then you forget about it. But there'll be lagging effects that we know for weeks and sometimes months and sometimes ongoing. So make sure you if you've had a little sprain, get that checked out professionally, and make sure that's rehabbed right back up to a full, not just adequate level, but proper performance strength level. That's really important because I reckon 9 months later after that little ankle incident, you're in the clinic with something else, and then we've got to trace it back. And gee whiz, it often comes back to that sprain that just throws out the muscle balance. So make sure you take those seriously as well. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. I certainly know for myself, many years ago, I did strain my ankle and it swelled up. And of course, I just ignored it, kept running, as you do. But that is the ankle now, that if it's going to give way, that's the one that gives way.
Yeah, exactly. So a little lateral ankle sprain turns into something called chronic ankle instability. And that's where you're spraining it all the time in progressively less dynamic situations. You're walking along, you step on a little stick and over she goes. The long-term consequence of that is a proportion of those go to ankle arthritis. And that's an absolute disaster because that's running days over. Yes. So, I'm not trying to scare anyone, but it's really easy to just strengthen up after a little sprain. It's not a big deal, but you do need to restore your movement, restore your strength fully, and restore your balance and control again. And that doesn't take much. So just do those little things well at the time.
Yeah, no, I just realised I missed a question that I wanted to ask. On your bio, you talked about that you deal with bunions. Now, can ultra run or any kind of runner, but because they're spending so much time on their feet, can they create bunions?
Yeah, so bunions, or as they're called in the game, hallux valgus, is when the toe, the great toe, tends to, if the listeners aren't familiar, the big toe tends to drift across, and we get a malalignment there, and then we get bony growth there, so a big lump there. There's definitely a hereditary component to them. So we don't emphatically know 100% what causes bunions. We know genetics is a contributing factor. We know in shoeless societies, of which there's not many left, they do not have bunions.
Oh, okay.
So that's interesting.
Mm.
And I think that speaks to what I'm pretty confident that a genetic predisposition of alignment, if you're a few degrees off, it starts to drift. That combined with poor footwear, in particular narrow toe boxes and high heels being the worst, fancy stilettos, that absolutely contributes to bunions. So can runners give themselves bunions? I think they can if they're predisposed to it and if they're wearing ill-fitting footwear. And I see that all the time. So you've got to get onto that early. Once it goes past a certain angle of deviation, it's very hard to pull it back, and it can result in surgery. So again, that's actually how we started with the Flamingo feet, the toe spreaders. Again, we started using them with great success in the bunion population, and then we started noticing that their arch muscles were getting stronger and their arch heights were improving, and so we started putting them in athletes and started getting results from that point of view too. So if you do have any sort of alignment issue with that big toe, it is so important that you get onto that really early. So some toe separators in there and some strengthening exercises for the muscles that hold it in good alignment, really, really key.
Yeah. I just thought that was important to touch on because, I mean, like we said, we don't often like to look at our feet because they can be quite ugly when you run enough. So it is important to be mindful of these things. Yeah,
exactly. You don't want bunion surgery. It's a long time off running, and it's pretty painful. It can be anyway. So yeah, we want to get onto that early.
And it generally comes back anyway, doesn't it?
No, with modern techniques. So the traditional shave it back. So they used to just shave the excess bone back. Now we've got a much better understanding of how that's actually the end result of the bunion. The cause is way up further back in the midfoot. And when you're starting to look at the midfoot, then you've got to look at the ankle. So it's all connected back together, and the surgeons now cut and reshape the bones further back up in the foot. They realign a lot of the biomechanics all the way back up through the first ray. So it's far more successful. It typically doesn't come back. That's unusual now, but hence why it's a big operation.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be a very big and complicated operation. So let's avoid that if we can by looking after our feet.
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining me today on the podcast. Where can people go to find out more about you or book an appointment or something like that?
Yeah, so I manage Baldwin Sports and Physiotherapy Centre. So if you're in Melbourne, you can pop in there if you like. So it's baldwinsportsphysio.com.au. But the other place is if you head to freestylefeet.com.au. That's the other business that we started to really help people get more out of their feet, particularly if they don't have access to physios or they don't have access to a podiatry. They're in a country town or they haven't had success with the therapist they've seen because of the reasons I alluded to earlier. We're just not necessarily that well trained in this part of the body. Then we really want to help people help themselves. So there's some videos on there on how to look after their feet and how to use little inexpensive little products that'll make a big difference.
Excellent. That sounds really good. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. And I wish you all well with your feet.
Thank you.